Hello everyone, welcome back to the True North Report. Today we're going to be discussing what's going on with the NXIVM case in the United States. As many of you know, NXIVM has been it was started off supposedly as a multi-level marketing company in the US near Albany, New York. I've heard that it's actually just outside of Albany, New York, but over the last couple of years, we've come to find out that is in fact a cult that was headed by Keith Rainier and Nancy Salzman. These were the two co-founders of the NXIVM cult. And since there have been breaks in this case, there's been new information that has come to light. There's been people who have pled guilty to racketeering, to human trafficking. I decided that I wanted to focus on this. Many other YouTubers have all focused on this case specifically for the amount of elites that have been involved in this, especially when we talk about Hollywood. But I wanted to just start off by going over some of the background information that's available to us, and we're going to cover a few of the people who have pled guilty and some of the other people who are still on the line, who are going to be facing trial soon enough. So as of now, we have all of the main people that were involved in the NXIVM cult that have been arrested and that are facing their court trials now. This involves Keith Rainier, this involves Nancy Salzman, this involves Allison Mack, this involves Claire Bronfman, and many others as well. So far, we have about 3 people that have pled guilty to the to different charges inside of the NXIVM cult, and just to show you just how many people are involved in this and how deep this runs, we're just going to quickly cover this here. So we're going to be talking about the people who are involved. So what we have is some of the people who are involved in this whole thing include Sheila Johnson. It also includes Kristen Kruk, Grace Park, Nikki Klein, Sarah Edmondson, Richard Branson, Linda Evans, Allison Mack, both Bronfman sisters. This is Claire and Sarah. So this runs pretty damn deep, and many have been involved in the Executive Success Program, or ESP, and this was sort of where this whole marketing ended up beginning with, because it was actually branded this way, and it was branded in a few different ways, like, as I said, multi-level marketing company, and also it's been branded as a form of women's empowerment group, but it really was a cult and a pyramid scheme. This is actually what put law enforcement onto the case to begin with, is that they believed it was a pyramid scheme, an illegal pyramid scheme that was operating. They received millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that have flown through the NXIVM corporation, or NXIVM cult. But this ends up going much deeper than it may seem. It's not so simple that it is just a pyramid scheme or a cult, but these were people that were trying to gain political influence in the US, in Mexico was a big one. I have no doubt that they were trying to gain some political influence here in Canada as well, but right now I don't have the evidence to back that up. We'll get into that in just a minute, but let's cover some what's been going on with the trials so far. There we go. So, Allison Mack has been one of the main people that have been involved in this cult. Now, she wasn't one of the head people, but one of the most recognizable faces that have been involved in this. They also had a few actresses who played parts in the series Battlestar Galactica. Allison Mack starred in Smallville for a long time. She ended up getting arrested, and she pled guilty to charges involved in this case. As it says here, Smallville actress Allison Mack pleaded guilty in New York court Monday to racketeering charges related to her role in the cult-like group whose leaders have been accused of sex trafficking. This was back on April 8th, 2019. Mack entered a plea as jury selection was about to begin in the trial of her co-accused Keith Rainier, the founder of NXIVM, a self-improved organization that prosecutors have likened to a pyramid scheme. Mack wept as she admitted manipulating women into becoming sex slaves for Rainier, known to his followers as the Vanguard. Quote, I believe Keith Rainier's intentions were to help people, and I was wrong, end quote. Mack told a federal court judge in Brooklyn. Mack was charged with conspiracy to commit sex trafficking and conspiracy to commit forced labor. Her sentencing has been delayed until September of this coming of a few months from now. I think September 11th is when she will be sentenced. But the first thing we need to know about this is that Allison Mack ends up saying that she believed that Keith Rainier's intention was to help people, and that she was wrong about that. And I'm sure that by extension, she believes that she was helping people. This could not be farther than the truth, because first of all, it's alleged that Allison Mack was the personal sex slave to Keith Rainier. That there was sort of a secret society involved with this cult, and that was where the sex slaves really more came out. These would be people who were brought in, they were groomed, they were meant to actually be personal slaves to both Nancy Salzman and Keith Rainier. But Allison Mack, as I understand it, was his personal slave. She didn't get traded with anybody else's, it was his. But what we found out that ended up happening inside of NXIVM puts to bed any idea that what she's saying, that she believed that Keith Rainier was there to help people, because we know that there was brainwashing that was involved. We know that there was branding involved. We know that there was corporal punishment that was involved. These were the type of group that when they separated you from your family, you didn't get to communicate with your family anymore. You didn't get to communicate with them. You didn't get to see them. They, in a very similar way that Scientology deems people to be a problem and how they'll make you cut you off from your friends and family. This is exactly what the cult ended up doing. We also know that Allison Mack was a sadist in this organization because, as I already mentioned, corporal punishment was one thing that ended up being a part of the NXIVM sex cult. And as it was said, Allison Mack was gleefully involved in dishing out corporal punishment. This just shows the type of person that she is and the type of people that the founders of this cult really were. And of course, that whenever we go to trial, you're never going to actually be honest, especially when you've committed a crime such as this. You're never going to be honest with how far things went. And this is exactly what Allison Mack is doing. Keith Rainier is also denying these charges, and he's saying that any sort of sex that was involved was completely consensual. This doesn't seem to be the case. I see no reason to believe anything that Keith Rainier and Allison Mack has said on the entire accusation. And again, when you start looking and see how deep this rabbit hole goes, then you know that they had ulterior motives than what they were leading on about. The main reason for bringing people in was mostly again trying to influence young women to get involved in this, and very high profile young women. I know that Emma Watson was one that I believe Allison Mack tried to recruit into the cult, but she didn't end up going through with it. We also know that starvation was another tactic that was used, and even Keith Rainier himself admitted that he liked his women thin. Now, how thin is the question, of course, but starvation seemed to be a very real thing that ended up happening. And even holding people against their will ended up happening in this cult, which we are going to see as we go through this story. Another person who has pled guilty so far is the co-founder, which is Nancy Salzman. She ends up saying, as it says here, Nancy Salzman, 65, told a court in New York that she has stolen email addresses of critics of NXIVM group and tampered with video evidence. Those are two very big crimes that she committed. Ms. Salzman, known as prefect in the group, is due to be sentenced in July. So this is, again, how we can know for a fact that this was a cult, that we have Nancy Salzman and Keith Rainier at the top, the highest levels of authority in NXIVM, and then they had to have a larger-than-life personality, and were pretty much being treated as a form of God. And then we can see this, how she was known as the prefect of the group, and Rainier was known as the Vanguard. So they're not even being called by their names, but they're giving themselves larger-than-life names. Nancy Salzman has also been one who's been pretty much outed as a sadist, and what she did to a lot of the people involved in this cult is just sick. Now, the sickest of them all is definitely Keith Rainier, because he used to brand the sex slaves involved in this in NXIVM inside what was known as DOS, which is sort of, as I was talking before, was this secret society within the NXIVM cult. They used to brand them with Keith Rainier's initials close to their genitals, whether that's on the front or the back, whether that's just above their vaginas or just on their ass cheeks, things such as that. I have seen some pictures where women were branded just above their vaginas, so that seems to me where the most popular spot was, and my guess would be is so that way anybody from there on would know who that slave belonged to. It belonged to Keith Rainier and Nancy Salzman. Definitely Rainier is the alpha of the whole group, however. But this, I think actually, when we're talking about these email addresses and the video surveillance, could probably go deeper than that, because we know that one of the Bronfman heiresses, Claire Bronfman, was involved in this. Well, she was actually the legal hitman of the group. Claire Bronfman was actually pretty high up in this whole organization. In fact, when the hierarchy was taken down, when the leaders of this were taken down, such as Nancy Salzman and Keith Rainier, then Bronfman would actually be one of the next in command of this whole cult. So she's not slightly involved. She's not a victim of this cult, but she's a victimizer of this cult. And as we're going to see as we go on, critics of the NXIVM cult would actually be sent letters which seem to be from a lawyer, and this would be saying that they're breaking the law, that they need to cease and desist. But these all came from Claire Bronfman herself. I mean, Claire Bronfman put in $150 million to $250 million into this cult. The Bronfmans are billionaires. They're a very rich family here in Canada and have been for a long time. We're going to get a little bit into their history in a little bit. And actually, as we're going to see, that this human aspect, this human trafficking aspect of the cult is just par for the course when it comes to the Bronfmans. But we have Claire Bronfman, we have Sarah Bronfman who've been involved in this, but so was Edgar Bronfman Sr., who was their father. He was also involved with it for a little bit before he ended up dropping out of it, and he is actually publicly on the record as saying that he believed it was a cult. Now, Edgar Bronfman Sr. is dead, actually. I can't remember which year he died, but he's been dead for a couple years now, at least. But when he dropped out of this group, NXIVM, he full out said that it was a cult. But it goes farther. NXIVM member admits enslaving women in a locked room for 2 years. That's going pretty damn far to lock someone up for 2 years. And again, it goes against any sort of idea that Claire Bronfman or Allison Mack bring up saying that they were trying to help people. This is clearly a violation of the law. This is clearly a form of detainment, clearly a form of sex trafficking, and this actually came from Lauren Salzman, who is the daughter of Nancy Salzman, who was the co-founder of the cult. And as it says here, she ends up making a quote while she was in court, and it says, "I knowingly and intentionally harbored Jane Doe 4, a woman whose identity is known to me, in a room in the home of a northern district of New York," said Lauren Salzman in Brooklyn federal judge Nicholas Garoffi's last week. Salzman told the judge that she had held the woman hostage between March 2010 and April 2012 and threatened to deport Jane Doe 4 back to Mexico if she did not complete labor requested by myself and others, court transcripts said. Now, Mexico has actually played a significant role in this whole NXIVM situation. They actually have a Mexican affiliate of the NXIVM cult that's going down over there, but this has even more involvement than you might think. This is actually going very deep in what's going on in Mexico. See, they had plans for Mexico not too long ago, just last year, 2018. There was the Mexican election that ended up taking place. Well, there's been a number of people involved in the NXIVM cult who can trace their family back pretty directly, all the way back to the presidency of Mexico. We're talking about 4 children of past Mexican presidents have been involved with the NXIVM cult. And for very good reason, is because the NXIVM cult was trying to gain political influence both in America but in Mexico, and this was why they were trying to drag in members of the Mexican. This is why they were trying to drag in people who were involved in Mexican politics, more specifically that could trace themselves back to the highest office in Mexico, because they wanted to gain political power over Mexico. And we'll see what I mean in just a minute. Let me just see here. All right. So this is from the Daily Mail. How the NXIVM sex cult infiltrated Mexico. Actress Catherine Oxenberg, whose daughter is a member, claims the children of 4 former Mexican presidents and many of the country's wealthy elites have also been brainwashed to join. Now, Catherine Oxenberg, and yes, her daughter is involved in the cult. She was involved in the cult for a little bit before she got out of it, and she was instrumental at bringing down this cult, exposing it for what it is, and that's one of the reasons that we have Keith Rainier, Nancy Salzman, Claire Bronfman, Allison Mack that are currently going to trial over this whole situation. And as it says here, down we see NXIVM's Mexican affiliate was headed by Emiliano Salinas, the son of former Mexican President Carlos Salinas. And I also know the name is escaping me right now what her name is. But I do know for a fact that the daughter of a former Mexican president, I know their last name is Fox, she was also involved in the cult as well. As it says here, Dynasty actress Catherine Oxenberg has claimed that the children of 4 former Mexican presidents are members of the NXIVM cult, which has been accused of branding female members and using them as sex slaves. Now, this actually runs deeper because they were trying to gain control of Mexico through this guy that we were just talking about, Emiliano Salinas. Again, his father was Carlos Salinas, and Carlos Salinas was seen as a very Machiavellian type politician. So what the plan was is they were going to use Emiliano Salinas, have him run in the 2018 presidential elections for Mexico, and get him in office. And then when he was in office, they were planning to use him as a puppet to enact what the policy changes that they needed in order to gain the influence over Mexico. This sounds pretty crazy, eh? It really does. And it actually sounds like it is the plot of some movie or some TV show. But this was actual reality. They were actually trying to gain influence over Mexico, control the country. And this has been made pretty obvious by now. This is from the Daily Beast. According to... Oh, right, I know where I was going with this. So, this was the plan that they were doing for Mexico. But it was actually very dangerous. These people had a lot more influence and a lot more power than the media is giving them credit for, because of what is said here. According to Catherine Oxenberg, the former Dynasty star who helped take down the sex cult, NXIVM leader Keith Rainier was a man on a sick mission. In her new book, Captive, A Mother Crusade to Save Her Daughter from a Terrifying Cult, Oxenberg sheds light on a number of Rainier's most sinister schemes. Now, the thing is depending on how much influence you had, how much of a voice you had in the public, depends how they treated you. See, if you were someone big like Catherine Oxenberg, then you got threatened. You got threatened with legal action, same as we've seen with, same that we've seen before. Sorry, trying to find something real quick. There we go. You get threatened with legal action because you're a big star. You can't really take out a big star, so they threaten him in other ways to shut them up, which we see here in what I've highlighted. It says, in Captive, Oxenberg reveals Keith had been playing and positioning his devoted follower Emilio Salinas in as his pawn for years while Emmy's family groomed him to follow his father's political footsteps. From what I hear about high-ranking defectors, the supposed plan was to get Emmy into office in Mexico's next presidential election in the summer of 2018 so the top-ranking SBN and NXIVM devotee could have power in the world's political stage. His father, Carlos, would use his Machiavellian methods to ensure his son's election win, and then Keith would use Emmy as his puppet to rule Mexico. What is crazy about this, though, actually, this is what I was looking for right here. So, as we can see here, it says, when Oxenberg began working to publicly expose NXIVM, she found herself on the wrong side of Rainier's Mexican foot soldiers. That October, she writes, I received threatening letters from a NXIVM lawyer and a state attorney general in Mexico, accusing me of numerous felonies, including fraud and extortion. Oxenberg later learned from court documents that the legal letters had been orchestrated by Keith Rainier and Seagram's heiress Claire Bronfman, who allegedly helped bankroll the cult to the tune of tens of millions. She explained to the Daily Beast that what they must have done is dispatch this task to NXIVM Mexico because there was no lawyer in the United States who would have done this. But that's if you're a high-ranking individual who's well-known and who's got a big public voice. But if you weren't that well known, there was one other thing that they could do. And this is down here in the highlighted section. At one point in the book, Oxenberg recalls being asked by a Mexican TV reporter not to publicly name him before their interview aired, quote, or I'll be killed, end quote. So this was no laughing matter. This was no simple cult that they were dealing with. They were dealing with people who had a lot of influence with the elites of our world, a lot of influence to take people out, including this Mexican reporter. This is a very serious accusation that Oxenberg is making of everything. Now, Claire Bronfman has been involved with this cult for a long time. So is her sister. And she has been one of those people that has walked in court as well. She pled guilty to racketeering. Bronfman heiress pleads guilty in NXIVM sex case. Claire Bronfman admitted in her plea in federal court in Brooklyn that she had harbored someone who was living in the U.S. illegally for unpaid labor and services, and that she committed credit card fraud on behalf of Keith Rainier, the leader of the group called NXIVM. Bronfman, the 40-year-old daughter of the late billionaire philanthropist and former Seagram chairman Edgar Bronfman Sr., told the judge that he had wanted to help people through NXIVM but ended up dishonoring her family. Quote, Your Honor, I was afforded a great gift with my grandfather and father, Bronfman said. With the gift come immense privilege and, more importantly, tremendous responsibility. It does not come with an ability to break the law. For this, I am truly sorry. Here's the kicker. As part of a plea agreement, Bronfman agreed to forfeit $6 million US. She faces up to 27 months in prison and sentencing on July 25th. So she more or less bought her way out of prison, because this is something that could land her in prison for a long period of time. Not even just what she was on trial for, but also her involvement with the cult. She could easily have been involved with the trafficking of human beings, but she ended up buying her way out because she's a billionaire. Now, this is just par for the course for the Bronfmans. Let's take a brief history lesson into who the Bronfmans are. The Bronfmans can trace themselves back to the very late 19th century in Canada. Anyway, that's when Samuel Bronfman ended up immigrating here. Now, who was Samuel Bronfman? Samuel Bronfman was known as the Rothschilds of the New World, because at the time, North America was still very new. So he was actually an agent of the Rothschilds, sent to Canada in order to be their voice and their hand over here, the right-hand man of the Bronfmans in the New World. They try and play off this. They started from humble roots type of scenario, that they were just simple farmers, and they ended up, they were just simple farmers, and they ended up working their way up in order to become billionaires, expanded their industry, but this is not what ended up happening. See, the Bronfmans actually really got their start when it came to prohibition in the U.S. When prohibition hit the U.S., that was when the Bronfmans had begun their distillery. They actually had begun it a little bit before when prohibition was in Canada before it ended, because pretty much prohibition in Canada ended right as prohibition in the U.S. started. So they were already doing a little bit of their distilleries with the Seagram, distilleries. But when that ended up happening, they ended up importing their booze over to the U.S. Now, they ended up importing this booze over to the U.S. through the use of the Jewish and Italian mafia. In fact, they were connected to Al Capone. They dealt directly with Al Capone. But on top of that, once the booze industry took off, and this is again where they made a lot of their money, but I have no doubt that they made a lot of their money. A lot of their money was given to them off the start by the Rothschilds in order for them to begin over here in Canada. Now, when that ended up happening, they ended up branching out into drugs and prostitution. This was something that people have tried to hide about the Bronfmans, but is very real that they did, was drugs and prostitution. So it's par for the course for them to be involved in human trafficking because they've been involved with it for a long period of time, going back to the early 20th century. It's also and their involvement when it comes to trying to influence politics is well known. Stephen Bronfman, who I believe is the uncle of Claire Bronfman. Stephen Bronfman, he's either the uncle or the cousin, but anyway, he has been one of the biggest Liberal Party fundraisers for the Trudeau government, and not just the Trudeau government, but the Liberals for a long time, but he is personal friends with Justin Trudeau. So this is just par for the course with what the Bronfmans do. They try and influence politics. They engage themselves when it comes to all sorts of sleazy activities such as human trafficking. Now, the NXIVM cult has again, I don't know their involvement when it came to Canada, aside for the fact that they had a lot of Canadian actresses that were involved. And these were not necessarily high-ranking celebrity actresses, maybe a couple D-listers, some C-listers. But they did try and influence politics in Mexico, which we've already seen, and they had a lot of power in Mexico, including the ability to whack someone if necessary. They didn't have quite the same amount of power in the US, but they were trying to buy that power. Because it's just come out very recently about NXIVM's connection all the way back to Hillary Clinton. Now, this is something that's been alleged for some time, and not just Hillary, but Bill too, Bill and Hillary Clinton. This has been something that's been alleged for a long time, but we finally have the proof that is necessary. It's coming from a whistleblower, a ex-NXIVM publicist, if I'm remembering correctly. This right here is from Zero Hedge. NXIVM sex cult prosecutors have evidence of illegal Clinton campaign contributions for political influence. And what we're specifically looking at here is this little box with the red underlining. I didn't do this. This was already done by Zero Hedge. But it says, at trial, the government intended to introduce witness testimony and documents demonstrating that in 2007, the defendants and their co-conspirators were involved with an illegal scheme to exceed contribution limits to a presidential primary candidate. Witness testimony, corroborated by documentary evidence, will demonstrate that at least 14 members of NXIVM community, including at least 5 of the defendants and co-conspirators, made the maximum campaign donations to a primary campaign with the understanding that it would be reimbursed by Bronfman or Nancy Salzman. At the suggestion of political operatives who have since pleaded guilty to an unrelated New York State bribery charge, also involving campaign contributions, the contributions were bundled and presented to the candidate at a fundraising event attended by conspirators, including Nancy Salzman. A cooperating witness who attended the event will testify that the defendants and their co-conspirators made the contributions in hope of obtaining political influence to advance their own agenda, including targeting perceived enemies of Rainier. The government will also seek to introduce evidence of similar conduit contributions to other elected officials as well as other political lobbyists in attempt to gain influence. And this is actually something that is confirmed, is that Hillary Clinton was not the only one that they were trying to gain influence from. It's not the only one they were giving money to their campaign. But she was one of the main ones, especially because she was high level in the Democratic Party, has been for a long time. I mean, this would be, she's already ran for president twice, but then we also know Clinton is well connected all the way back to the ruling class and the political elites in America and even worldwide. So it makes sense why they would be trying to give her the money and try and gain her support, so that way they could try and push for their own agenda. And this is from Big League Politics. Court docs. Prosecutors asked to present evidence that NXIVM sex cult leader illegally bundled money for Hillary Clinton campaign. So, prosecutors have asked to present evidence in the NXIVM sex cult racketeering trial showing that NXIVM leaders, including Nancy Salzman and Claire Bronfman, illegally bundled money for Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign by compelling members to donate to the Clinton and then reimburse the members. Quote, I was there and I knew that the contributions were made by more than a dozen NXIVM members to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. Former NXIVM employee Frank Parlato tells Big League Politics, confirming that the court documents refer to the Clinton campaign. Now, this guy here, Frank Parlato, Parlato. He is the one that I was talking about, this whistleblower from the NXIVM cult. He was the publicist, if I'm remembering correctly, for NXIVM, or the public relations officer. So when he turned, he had a lot of information about NXIVM that is blowing the doors on this whole situation. And Claire Bronfman has also given lots of money to the Hillary Clinton over the course of 2007 to 2008. And we have here from OpenSecret.org, which is Claire Bronfman, the money that she has given to Clinton, and not just Clinton actually, because we can see here that right at the top, we actually start at the bottom because that's the oldest date. We got her giving to Hillary Clinton on March 14th, 2007. 31st of May 2007, she gave money actually to the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And then we have the 28th of September 2007, Hillary Clinton again. 28th of August 2008, Hillary Clinton again. So this is well documented. We know for it to be we know it is a fact that she's been giving money, and a lot of NXIVM members have been giving money to political operatives, to politicians and others inside of America. Let's see here. Hillary Clinton, $3,000 fans are her cult following. Just going, and it just sort of expands on this whole situation, which is executives and top associates of the Albany-based NXIVM group, along with her family members, donated $29,900 to Clinton's presidential campaign, according to federal records. So they're not giving the most amount of money to the Clintons, but they gave enough of it, and for reasons that we have seen already. This was a cult that was not only just about sex slaves and controlling people and getting money for themselves, but they were actually trying to buy political influence in North America with many well-known politicians and political elites in order to, some are trying to say some sort of take over the world type of situation. I don't know if that is true, but they were definitely trying to carve their way in North America to gain as much power and influence as possible, all for the ego of Keith Rainier and Nancy Salzman, but definitely Keith Rainier most of all. Maybe Keith Rainier had Nancy Salzman under some sort of control, not hypnosis or anything, but just through influence. If he was a very charismatic human being, maybe he had influenced her to come over to his side and they were working together. Or maybe Nancy Salzman was just as power hungry, as sadistic as Keith Rainier was. So we have all the top people who are involved with this cult that are now going to trial, pleading guilty to everything, but still trying to play innocent. We were just trying to help people. But you can see that this was not the case. Not the case at all. And for all we know, people may have died at the hands of this cult. Not necessarily involved in the cult, but maybe they did whack somebody who was trying to ask too many questions or was going to blow the whistle on them. We don't know, but it is a possibility, and I think a probability when it comes to what type of cult we're dealing with. So Keith Rainier's trial will begin next month, and because Allison Mack because she has pled guilty, she will not be standing next to Keith Rainier, nor will Claire Bronfman of this whole situation. They will not be standing next to Keith Rainier. He'll be going to trial alone, and we'll end up seeing what ends up happening. The True North Report will bring you updates on what's going on in the trial as they come out. Before I leave off, I also want to talk about just one more thing about Claire Bronfman, and that is that Claire Bronfman engaged in even more activity when it came to the NXIVM cult, because we know that she actually hacked into her father, Edgar Bronfman Sr.'s computer in order to try and get information when it came to world leaders. Now, what? We don't actually know, but Amazing Polly, if you know her YouTube channel, she kind of talked about this a little bit, and she believes that it may have some relation to the World Jewish Congress, because Edgar Bronfman Sr. was a member. In fact, I think he was like the president of the World Jewish Congress, and the World Jewish Congress was trying to get the Swiss banks to open up their vaults to try and see if open up their vaults, open up their documents to see if there was any sort of Jewish artwork, Jewish treasures that they had taken during World War II by the Nazis. Whether that was the Nazis had deposited them in the Swiss bank accounts themselves in order to protect them, or the other way around, and when the Allied forces they ended up defeating the Nazis, whether they took a lot of these artworks, these treasures, and they ended up depositing them into the Swiss banks. I don't know if that is actually true, but that is what she seemed to believe in, and I thought it was just worth bringing up at the end. I would like to ask you all, if you enjoy the reporting that I do here, then please go to my Facebook page. I have a Facebook page dedicated to reporting the news, the True North Report News Network. You type it in on Facebook, and you can find me there. And all I do is I am trying to present the news stories that are relevant for the day and try and report them. For the most part, I try and be as impartial as possible when it comes to what I put on my Facebook page, but I'm trying to also expand how much reach I have. So if you could go to the Facebook page, share the stories, I would greatly appreciate it. I try and update it every day with at least a couple stories and what's relevant for that day. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in to the True North Report, and I will be back soon to deliver more news that you need to know, and also to discuss more of what's going on with the NXIVM cult. Take care, everyone. I'll talk to you soon.